Now, I want to get into an article by Topher Spiro of the Center for American Progress, because he has an interesting proposal for an interesting problem. First, I want to get into some of the facts. So Topher Spiro is the Senior Fellow and Vice President for the Health Policy at the Center for American Progress. And he goes on to, in his article, last month, 43 states and Puerto Rico sued prescription drug companies. Remember, we were just talking about illegal drugs. Now we're talking about prescription drugs. Prescription drug companies for inflating prices by up to 1,000% from 2013 to 2015. And in those inflated drugs include generics as well. And from 2012 to 2016, the average price of insulin nearly doubled. Okay? And according to a Politico survey, about 80% of Americans think that drug prices are a major issue. And Politico also found that Congress, when polled, was quite divided on how to handle the issue. Now, those are the facts. And Mr. Spiro points them out really, really well. Now, I want to get into what his proposal is, because that's the key thing here. He says there's a simple solution for lowering prices of both old and new drugs for all Americans, not just for seniors under Medicare. A windfall profits tax that takes back surplus profits derived from excessive prices. This tax would be equal to the difference between a drug's list price, the price that is used for patient payments, and the drug's justified price multiplied by the number of units sold. Now, Mr. Spiro is not the first to make a case to create a windfall tax or some kind of additional tax on drug companies or this scenario. Regardless, I'm going to address his argument and how it fails to address the underlying economics of the situation. Now, I'm going to go on and give you a little bit more context from the article. He writes that he proposes that the Institute of Drug Assessment within the National Institutes of Health would assess the values of the drugs. So essentially that a government body would assess the value of the drugs. They would create an assessment, a formal assessment using a variety of factors, and I quote, such as demographic subgroups, the disease burden, the effect of the drug, health inequity, affordability, and so on. And he says, drug companies are to be required to submit to the Institute a dossier of clinical evidence that speaks to the drug's benefits and risks. Okay. And he says that then the government and these companies would come to an agreement, or if they couldn't, that the government would simply set the price for them. And then this would be done through the Department of Health and Human Services. And the idea being that if we create this new body or expand the existing body within the government that handles this, then somehow we'll get the prices to work. Now, there's a few points that I want to address here. First is that he's assuming that monopolies, because what he's saying is that the drug companies have created this oligarchy, this monopoly, there's very few players, etc. Well, regulated industries tend to have fewer and fewer players over time as regulation is increased. A great example of this are utilities and private utilities. Utility companies, phone providers, telecom companies, they're notorious for having bad customer service. The prices seem to stay the same all the time. It's because there's usually only one or two providers in the area. And this is set up through the local government only issuing permits to one organization. Compare this to the TV industry, the cell phone industry, your laptops. Prices have gone way down. Power has gone way up on your cell phone. If you've got an iPhone, you've got fantastic camera quality that you couldn't get out of an expensive Kodak or Canon years ago. Now, I also want to point out that these regulations also create the leviathans that Mr. Spiro talks about, because And I've got a link to a Forbes article from 2015 by Nicole Fisher. The literature says that it costs an average of $2.5 billion to get a novel drug to market. $2.5 million to get a drug to market. And very few products ever hit blockbuster status, meaning about $1 billion in sales. And that wouldn't even be breaking even, right? You have to spend $2.5 billion to have $1 billion in sales. The math does not work. And in 2015, she cites a very large merger, a $15.8 billion deal for Salix Pharmaceuticals. It came to an end as Valiant Pharmaceuticals beat Endo International with an all-cash offer for Salix Pharmaceuticals. And so you see merger after merger because it takes too much. You have to go through too many hoops. You have the patent laws, you have FDA approvals, you have testing and study requirements, you have federal, state, local codes, medical licensing. You've got thousands of pages of laws that you have to get through to get a drug out into the market. And so what Mr. Spiro's proposal would do would only create another layer of bureaucracy that a potential competitor would have to go through to actually get a drug to market. Maybe instead of it costing $2.5 billion, now it's going to cost $2.6 because you've got to figure out how to get around that rule. And there's also the assumption that drug companies and politicians are clean, that they're moral, respectable, straight shooting people. Well, look, there's a report from Kaiser Health News. In January 2018, 340 congressional staffers were ex-Big Pharma employees. The Secretary of Health and Human Services under Donald Trump is ex-Eli Lilly. He was an ex-executive for one of the biggest producers of insulin in the United States, and now he's the Director of Health and Human Services. Sorry, the Secretary. It's a revolving door. Are you going to trust that revolving door? And last, I'll add that there are solutions that we can find. Check out our old episodes with Charles Frohman. I think it was We Do Better number 4. You can sign up for a health sharing company and start buying drugs from foreign countries like India. India has different patent laws from us, and so they can produce all the generics they want, and their drugs are at a fraction of the cost. Why don't you buy their drugs there? You can also check out the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. They talk about how to get healthy with a whole food plant-based diet. Those links are in the show notes. Go to labdoor.com. They work in the supplement industry, which is basically an unregulated field. How do you know your supplements are any good? Well, Labdoor does the testing to make sure that the supplements you buy are top notch.
I tried to give away all I